I thought I was just an observer to a stranger's hateful outburst on a city bus. But her cunning retaliation soon turned the entire incident, and the police, against me with a shocking accusation of stalking. The city bus sighed to a halt, its brakes groaning like an old man getting out of a comfortable chair. The doors hissed open, letting in a gust of damp, exhaust-scented air. I barely looked up from my phone, just another body in the sea of tired commuters heading home on a Tuesday evening. My car was in the shop, which meant I was subjected to the public transit lottery, and tonight I was not feeling like a winner. All I wanted was my couch, a bowl of leftover pasta, and the sweet, sweet silence of my own apartment. I shifted in the worn vinyl seat, my headphones in but no music playing, a passive shield against the world. That's when she got on. You know the type. You can feel them before you see them. A certain stiffness in their posture, a purse clutched like a weapon, and a face set in a permanent state of disapproval. She was probably in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a beige trench coat that looked far too expensive for a city bus. Her eyes scanned the crowded aisle, her lips thinning with every person she dismissed. She was looking for a problem. The air in the bus seemed to change, the low hum of conversations and phone screens suddenly charged with a new, anxious energy. She finally settled into an empty seat across the aisle from me, letting out a performative, aggrieved sigh as she arranged her coat around her. I tried to go back to scrolling mindlessly, but my attention was snagged. I couldn't look away. A few rows ahead of her sat an elderly woman with a beautiful, brightly colored sari and kind, wrinkled eyes. She was speaking softly into her phone in a language I didn't recognize. A warm, melodic cadence to her voice. It was a gentle, loving conversation, the kind you have with a grandchild, her face breaking into a soft smile every few seconds. It was a perfectly normal, human moment. But the woman in the beige coat, who I was already mentally calling Karen, clearly disagreed. She started with the subtle stuff. A louder sigh, a pointed glare, shifting in her seat so aggressively the vinyl squeaked in protest. The elderly woman was oblivious, lost in her conversation. A few other passengers started to notice. A guy in a construction vest lowered his newspaper. A teenager across from him slowly pulled out one of his earbuds. We were all watching, a silent, unwilling audience to a play we knew was about to turn ugly. Then Karen leaned forward. "Unbelievable," she muttered, just loud enough for the surrounding seats to hear. Her voice was sharp, like cracking ice. Absolutely no consideration for anyone else. The elderly woman on the phone paused, her brow furrowing slightly. She'd heard it. She looked over, a question in her eyes. Karen met her gaze with a venomous stare. That was all the invitation she needed. "Do you mind?" Karen's voice was no longer a mutter. It sliced through the bus's low rumble. "Some of us would like a little peace and quiet. We don't want to listen to your yelling." The elderly woman's eyes widened. She wasn't yelling. She was barely speaking above a whisper. She looked flustered, immediately holding the phone away from her mouth. "Oh, I am sorry," she said, her accent thick but her English clear. "So sorry." She started to say goodbye to whoever was on the other end. But Karen wasn't done. She wasn't looking for an apology. She was looking for a fight. She stood up, bracing herself on the pole. "Sorry isn't good enough. People like you come to this country and you think you can just do whatever you want. This is America. We speak English here. English." A cold, heavy silence fell over the bus. The engine's hum seemed to disappear. Every single person was frozen, staring. My own heart was pounding against my ribs. My hands felt cold and clammy. A voice screamed in my head, "Say something. Do something." But I was cemented to my seat. A coward. I'm not proud of it. I just kept thinking about what would happen if her rage turned on me. I've had those words spat at me before. The shame and fear were paralyzing. The elderly woman looked utterly humiliated, her face flushing a deep red. She had hung up the phone and was now just staring down at her hands in her lap, looking small and fragile. "That's right, look away," Karen sneered, her voice dripping with triumph. "You should be ashamed. Babbling on in some foreign gibberish, probably talking about us. Plotting something for all we know. It's disgusting." The air was so thick with tension I could barely breathe. The bus driver glanced in the rearview mirror but said nothing. The construction worker stared at the floor. The teenager looked out the window, and I just sat there, my insides twisting into a tight, useless knot. We were all cowards. And then a small, clear voice cut through the toxic silence. "Excuse me." It came from the seat directly behind Karen. A young mother was sitting there with her daughter, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. The girl was standing up on the seat, her little pink sneakers planted firmly on the vinyl, her hand holding onto the back of Karen's seat for balance. She had bright, curious brown eyes and a determined set to her small chin. Karen, momentarily thrown off her hateful rhythm, spun around. "What did you say?" she snapped, her face contorted with rage. The little girl didn't flinch. She looked the furious woman directly in the eye, her expression not one of fear, but of genuine confusion. "I was just asking," she said, her voice impossibly steady. "Why don't you like her language? My friend at school, her grandma speaks like that. I think it sounds pretty. It sounds like singing." The entire bus held its breath. The direct, innocent honesty of the question seemed to suck all the air out of Karen's sails. For a split second, she just stared, mouth agape, completely disarmed. But it was only for a second. The rage didn't disappear. It just changed, focusing, sharpening into an even more terrifying point. Her eyes narrowed into slits, and she took a step closer to the child, leaning over her. "You," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous, a predator zeroing in on new prey. "What did you just say to me, you little brat?" Before the girl's mother could even react, a wave of motion rippled through the bus. It wasn't one person, but several. It was the construction worker in front of me, who turned his whole body in his seat, his burly arms crossed over his chest. His expression was granite. "Hey," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You don't talk to a kid like that." Simultaneously, the teenager who had been staring out the window was now on his feet, holding his phone up, its camera light a tiny, accusatory star. "I'm recording this," he announced, his voice cracking slightly but full of a newfound resolve. The mother, emboldened by the sudden surge of support, pulled her daughter behind her, creating a human shield. "Get away from my child," she said, her voice shaking but laced with steel. "You have a problem. You deal with me." Karen looked like a cornered animal. Her head whipped from the construction worker, to the teenager's phone, to the defiant mother. Her face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, was now twisting into something uglier, something panicked. The power she held just moments before, the power of our collective silence, had evaporated. She was no longer the one in control. But the little girl wasn't finished. She poked her head around her mom's legs, her brow furrowed in that same earnest, analytical way. "You were the one yelling," she said, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. "That lady," she pointed a small finger towards the elderly woman, who was now watching the scene unfold with wide, stunned eyes, "was quiet. You were loud. You made her sad." It was so simple, so devastatingly, irrefutably true. The hypocrisy of Karen's entire tirade was laid bare by a 7-year-old. The lie that she was the victim, the one seeking peace and quiet, was shattered. A nervous laugh bubbled up from someone in the back of the bus. It was quickly stifled, but the sound hung in the air, another crack in Karen's crumbling facade. And that's when my own shame finally boiled over into action. For 5 minutes I had sat there, a useless spectator, while an old woman was humiliated and a little girl was forced to be braver than any adult on that bus. My fear hadn't protected anyone, it had only enabled the bully. I felt my own phone, heavy in my pocket. My hands were shaking, but a cold, clear purpose settled over me. I pulled it out. I didn't say a word, I just aimed the camera directly at Karen's face and pressed record. Seeing my phone, a second camera now documenting her meltdown, was the final straw. Karen let out a strangled cry of pure rage. "How dare you? You can't record me, that's illegal. All of you conspiring against me." She was flailing now, not just with her words, but with her hands, gesturing wildly. Her perfectly coiffed hair was coming loose, a blonde strand falling across her contorted face. She took a clumsy, enraged step towards the teenager. "Give me that phone." But she never reached him. The construction worker was on his feet in a flash, his big body blocking the aisle like a brick wall. He didn't touch her, didn't even speak. He just stood there, an immovable object. Karen recoiled as if she'd run into a physical barrier. She was trapped. Every eye was on her. 2 phones were recording her. Her audience was no longer intimidated. They were witnesses. She spun around, her eyes wild, searching for an escape, an ally, anything. Her gaze landed back on the elderly woman, the original target of her hate. A new, vile idea seemed to spark in her eyes. "This is all your fault," she shrieked, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at her. "You and your foreign nonsense. You started all of this." She started to move towards the old woman, a desperate, last-ditch effort to reclaim her power by attacking the most vulnerable person she could find. That's when it happened. With a violent lurch and a deafening screech of brakes, the bus swerved to the side of the road and slammed to a stop, throwing everyone forward. My phone flew from my hand, skittering across the grimy floor. Karen stumbled, catching herself on a pole, her shriek cut short by a grunt of surprise. The bus driver had been a silent observer until now, just a pair of eyes in the rearview mirror. But he was silent no longer. He wrenched the parking brake, and the hiss of the air system was the only sound in the stunned silence. He stood up, his large, uniformed frame seeming to fill the entire front of the bus. He didn't look at Karen. He didn't look at the little girl or the construction worker. He looked directly at me. His face was unreadable. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion as he spoke, not to the bus, but to a dispatch radio I hadn't even noticed before. "Dispatch, this is bus 407, he said, his voice echoing in the sudden, dead quiet. "I have a 1053 in progress. Bell Street and 6th. We're not moving. Send a unit. Now." A 1053. I knew that code. I used to be a crime reporter years ago. It means public disturbance, but it's often the code used when things are escalating, when a situation is volatile and unpredictable. The bus driver's voice was calm, but the words he used sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was an official incident. We were all now part of a police report. The doors remained sealed, the windows framing the outside world like a movie screen we couldn't access. We were locked in a metal box with Karen's rage. Her face went from crimson to a pasty, chalky white. The word police had a profound effect on her. Her blustering, self-righteous anger collapsed inward, replaced by a frantic, cornered fear. "Police? You're calling the police on me?" she stammered, her voice a high-pitched squeak. She turned to the bus driver, her hands fluttering in a gesture of panicked disbelief. "She was the one causing the problem. I'm the victim here. I was just asking for some common courtesy." The bus driver turned his head slowly, deliberately, and finally fixed his gaze on her. His eyes were dark and tired, the eyes of a man who had seen this exact scene play out 1,000 times. "Ma'am," he said, his voice as flat and unyielding as the pavement outside, "please take a seat. The police will sort it out." His tone left no room for argument. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Karen looked around desperately, seeking an ally in the sea of stony faces. She found none. The teenager still had his phone up. The construction worker had returned to his seat but sat on the edge, coiled and ready. The little girl was now sitting quietly on her mother's lap, watching everything with wide, solemn eyes. Even I had retrieved my phone and was recording again, my hand much steadier this time. The narrative had been written, and she was the villain. Her power, built on our fear and silence, was utterly gone. She slumped into the nearest empty seat, her expensive trench coat bunched up around her, a deflated balloon of hatred. She began muttering to herself, a litany of injustices and conspiracies, how everyone was against her, how this country was going to the dogs. No one listened. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the tense, fearful silence of complicity. It was the quiet, humming silence of waiting, of resolution. We were all bound together in this strange, temporary community, waiting for the authorities to arrive and put an official stamp on what we already knew to be true. It was during this wait that something beautiful happened. The elderly woman, who had been the target of so much vitriol, reached into her large patterned bag. She rummaged around for a moment before pulling out a small, crinkly plastic package. She leaned across the aisle, past the now silent Karen, and offered it to the little girl. They were candies, brightly colored little hard candies wrapped in cellophane. The little girl looked at her mother, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The child reached out a small hand and took one, her tiny voice a clear bell in the quiet bus. "Thank you," she said. The elderly woman's face broke into a smile. It was a small thing, a piece of candy, but it felt monumental. It was an act of grace in the face of ugliness, a connection forged where someone else had tried to build a wall. I felt a lump form in my throat. I made sure my camera captured that small, perfect moment. The distant wail of a siren grew steadily louder, cutting through the low hum of the bus's idle engine. The flashing blue and red lights soon painted the bus windows in strobing colors, reflecting off the faces of the passengers. Karen shrank further into her seat, trying to make herself invisible. A police car pulled up directly in front of the bus, blocking its path. 2 officers got out, their expressions all business. The bus driver hit a button, and the doors hissed open with a sigh of finality. The first officer stepped onto the bus, his hand resting casually on his hip. He was young, with a calm, observant face. "What's going on here?" he asked, his eyes sweeping over the passengers. Before anyone could speak, Karen shot to her feet, her voice finding its shrill power once more. "Officer, thank God! This man," she pointed a trembling finger at the bus driver, "is holding me hostage. And these people—" Her arm swept across the bus, indicating all of us. "They assaulted me! They ganged up on me!" The officer just looked at her, his expression unchanged. "Okay, Mum, let's just all take a breath." He glanced at the bus driver, who gave a slight shake of his head. The officer's eyes then landed on the teenager, who still held his phone aloft like a torch. "You have video of this?" "Yes, sir," the teenager said, his voice surprisingly firm. "I got the whole thing." "Me too," I added, holding up my own phone. The officer nodded. "Good. Don't delete that." His gaze moved past Karen, settling on the elderly woman, then on the little girl and her mother. He seemed to assess the entire situation in a single, sweeping glance. He turned to his partner who was standing at the door. "Get her statement. Off the bus." He then looked back at Karen. "Ma'am, let's you and I have a chat outside." Karen's face crumpled. "But I'm the victim," she insisted, her voice cracking. "We'll get to that, ma'am," the officer said with practiced patience. "Right now, I need you to step off the bus." He gestured towards the open doors. It was clear this was not a negotiation. Defeated, Karen gathered her purse and her tattered dignity and followed the officer down the steps and onto the curb. We watched through the window as he started talking to her, his notepad out. His partner, a woman with a kind but firm face, stepped onto the bus. She approached the elderly woman first, speaking in a low, respectful tone. I felt a collective sigh of relief ripple through the bus. It was over. Justice, in its small bureaucratic way, was being served. The bus driver finally turned off the flashing hazard lights and leaned back in his seat, rubbing his tired eyes. He had done the right thing. We all had, eventually. I was about to stop recording when I noticed something out the window. Karen was talking animatedly to the male officer, pointing back at the bus, her voice rising and falling in a frantic rhythm. The officer listened patiently for a few moments, then held up a hand to stop her. He said something, and her entire demeanor changed. Her shoulders slumped. She fumbled in her purse, pulling out her wallet. The officer took something from it, looked at it, then spoke into his radio. A few seconds later, he looked at Karen and said something else. And then Karen looked up, her eyes scanning the windows of the bus. She looked past the teenager, past the construction worker, past the mother and child. Her eyes found mine. A slow, chilling smile spread across her face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. She pointed directly at me, and as the officer turned to follow her gaze, her smile widened, and she mouthed a single silent word that made the blood in my veins run cold. "You." My heart plummeted into my stomach. Me? Why me? 1,000 panicked thoughts raced through my mind. Had I broken some obscure law by recording her? Was she claiming I was the ringleader? The officer's eyes met mine through the glass, and he gave a curt nod, a clear summons. My hands started to shake again. The triumphant feeling of a few moments ago curdled into a new, sour dread. I had gotten involved, and now, somehow, the tables were turning. The female officer on the bus must have seen the exchange because she walked over to me. "He needs to speak with you," she said, her voice neutral. I nodded numbly, my throat too tight to speak. As I stood up to leave, the little girl's mother reached out and briefly squeezed my arm. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the small bit of courage I needed. I stepped off the bus into the cool evening air, the flashing police lights feeling accusatory and surreal. Karen was standing a few feet away, her arms crossed, that venomous, victorious smile still plastered on her face. She looked like she had just won the lottery. "This is the one, officer," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "She's the one who was harassing me, a real troublemaker. I want to press charges." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "What? That's insane! You were the one screaming racist abuse at an elderly woman." The officer held up a hand, a gesture for calm. "Let's just take it one step at a time," he said, turning to me. "Ma'am, my name is Officer Miller. This woman, Ms. Albright," he gestured to Karen, "claims you have been stalking her. She says you've been following her for weeks, recording her without her consent, and that this incident on the bus was a pre-planned ambush to publicly humiliate her. She's filed a restraining order against you. I just ran your name. It was approved by a judge this morning." The world tilted on its axis. Stalking? A restraining order? It was a lie so audacious, so completely detached from reality, that I couldn't even process it. "This morning? That's impossible. I've never seen this woman before in my life," I sputtered. "Oh, really?" Karen, or Miss Albright, chimed in, her voice full of theatrical disbelief. "What about last Tuesday at the grocery store? Or Friday at the post office? You were there, following me. I have witnesses." The lies were coming so fast and so easily it was terrifying. This wasn't just a random bigot having a meltdown. This was a calculated, manipulative sociopath. She had weaponized the system. She had seen my face, a face she didn't like, and decided to destroy me. "Officer," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling, "this is a complete fabrication. I have a video of the entire incident on the bus. It shows exactly what happened." "I'd like to see that," he said, his expression still unreadable. I unlocked my phone and handed it to him. He started watching the video, his thumb scrolling through the footage. As he watched, I saw the first flicker of a change in his stoic demeanor. His jaw tightened. He glanced over at Miss Albright, who was now looking a little less confident, her smug smile faltering. "I have a video too," the teenager said, stepping off the bus and holding out his phone. The construction worker followed. "We all saw what happened. She went after that old lady for no reason, and then she threatened a little kid." Officer Miller took their phones as well, comparing the videos, his focus intense. The female officer was now taking statements from the mother and the elderly woman on the bus, their quiet, consistent stories weaving together. The wall of lies Ms. Albright had constructed was starting to crumble under the weight of simple, undeniable truth. Officer Miller finally looked up from the phones, his gaze now hard as steel. He handed our phones back. He walked over to Ms. Albright. "Ma'am, filing a false police report is a serious offense. So is perjury, which is what you did when you lied to a judge to get that restraining order." Her face went pale. I was scared. "She has a vendetta against me." "Your story isn't holding up," he said, his voice dropping to a low, authoritative tone. "I have multiple video accounts and over a dozen eyewitnesses who all tell a very different story. A story about a racially motivated verbal assault and menacing behavior. Now we can do this one of two ways. You can revoke your complaint and the restraining order right now, and we can all go home. Or I can take everyone downtown, and we can spend the rest of the night sorting through charges of harassment, intimidation, and filing a false report. And I can assure you, you will be the only one leaving in handcuffs. It's your choice." For the first time, true, abject fear appeared in Karen's eyes. Her mask of superiority was gone, revealing the pathetic, hateful person underneath. She was a bully who had finally run into a wall she couldn't break. She stared at the officer, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish. She looked at the bus full of people staring back at her, no longer victims, but a jury. She was utterly and completely beaten. "Fine," she whispered, the word barely audible. The sound was a puff of air, the last gasp of her defeated rage. The resolution was swift and blessedly anticlimactic. The restraining order was voided on the spot. Miss Albright was given a stern warning that left her visibly shaking, and then told to find another way home. She was banned from this bus line, effective immediately. She scurried away into the night, a pathetic figure swallowed by the city darkness, her beige coat no longer a symbol of superiority, but a shroud of shame. The officers took a final statement from me and the bus driver, thanked us, and left. The driver got back into his seat, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He turned and looked at the remaining passengers. "All right, folks," he said, a hint of a weary smile on his face. "Let's get you home." As the bus rumbled back to life and pulled away from the curb, a quiet, peaceful atmosphere settled over us. We weren't strangers anymore. We were the passengers of Bus 407, the ones who had seen ugliness and stood up to it. The elderly woman caught my eye and gave me that same warm, grateful smile she had given the little girl. The teenager gave me a thumbs up. The little girl, now asleep on her mother's shoulder, was the bravest person I had ever met. She hadn't been afraid to ask a simple question, and in doing so, she had given all of us our courage back. I rode the rest of the way home not looking at my phone, but at the faces around me, feeling a sense of connection, of shared humanity, that I hadn't felt in a very long time. My pasta was cold by the time I got home, but I didn't care. I felt warm,